Hi, I'm Elliot Margulies. I'm with the Mid-Peninsula Community Media Center, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Peter Drekmeier, the outgoing mayor of Palo Alto. Peter was elected in 2005, has served a 4-year term, and has opted not to try for re-election. But he's here today to review the past year where he was at the helm, and to look at Palo Alto's strengths and challenges. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm with Peter Dreckmeyer, the outgoing mayor of Palo Alto, and Peter came to the city council in 2006 without having served on a public commission, a city commission. Came a different route. He had been the executive director of Bay Area Action, one of the most fun and effective environmental organizations I've ever seen, and had run a couple of advocacy campaigns on environmental issues. And so he came to the council, served his 4 years, which is just about to wrap up. And we want to especially focus in on your last year as the mayor. I think a lot of people, when they get their year as mayor, start to rub their hands together and think about what kind of legacy can they leave, like what kind of new programs can I get started here and be known for, what new buildings or parks. And you came on board during a year that witnessed the greatest recession since the Great Depression of '29 and the 30s and stuff. So in talking to you, I wondered if you were going to say, well, we couldn't do anything, but I had a good time. But instead, it sounded like, and it sounds like, you have quite a bit that you feel got started even in this past year. So I wanted to let you start to tick off some of the things that you think really defied that recessionary spirit and showed a lot of growth and change in Palo Alto.
Well, going back a little bit, the reason I ran for city council is because I'm passionate about environmental issues, and in part because I grew up in Palo Alto, and we have a long legacy of protecting the environment and thinking ahead, knowing that it'll benefit us as well. And at the national level for 8 years, there was really no leadership. So worked hard to try to bring in a stronger environmentalist in 2004. We weren't successful. And I realized that that kind of leadership is probably going to have to come at the local level. And what better place than Palo Alto? People pay attention to what happens here. We're, hub of technology, Stanford University, all the great minds here. Community really committed to progressive ideals. And so I ran on an environmental agenda. I couldn't really escape it. I mean, people knew that was what my profession was, and that's what brought me back to Palo Alto to work on the Earth Day 1990 campaign. We were the international headquarters here. And so I think some of the things I'm most proud of are our leadership on those issues. When you're on the council, the first meeting of the year, close to the beginning of the year, the council gets together and we talk about, well, what are our priorities going to be this year? If everything's a priority, then nothing is. So what are we going to really focus on? And being a newbie, I thought, well, I'll go for it. Why don't we focus on reducing our carbon dioxide emissions? And other council members said, well, that's important, and there are probably other ways we could address that. And so it wasn't a priority, but a couple months later, the mayor of that year, Judy Kleinberg, announced she was forming a Green Ribbon Task Force on climate protection. Got probably 50 or 60, 70 people from the community involved in that. And these are really smart people, and some business people, some affiliated with education, neighborhood leaders, and others. And out of that came a series of recommendations on what the city could do. We have our own utility, so we have some control over what kind of energy we purchase and distribute. And it was, I think, a real inspiration to the council to see these people get involved with these great ideas. So we directed staff to come up with a climate protection plan, and they did, and our goal is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 15% by 2020. Personally, I think we're going to far exceed that, and we should have a more ambitious goal, but it's a start, and was the first of those. We also have a zero waste plan, goal of getting from 63% waste reduction now to 90% or greater by 2021.
What does that mean? The out of City Hall or throughout the whole
throughout
city?
the community, throughout the city. So one of the new things, we just entered into a new waste contract with Green Waste, and we have created a composting program for organic waste from restaurants and flower stores and commercial sector. Eventually that'll expand to residences, so they'll not only be able to compost yard waste but also food scraps. We have a green building ordinance. This year we banned plastic bags and polystyrene as part of our zero waste. And one of the things I'm really excited about is we created a task force to focus on composting, because right now we compost yard waste at the dump in Palo Alto, which is slated to close in a year or two and become Bixby Park. So at that point, we were looking at exporting all of this waste, about 20,000 tons per year, down to Gilroy, 50 miles away. And some of us were concerned that, well, in the name of zero waste, we might be generating more atmospheric waste. We need to look at the big picture.
Because of the transportation.
Right. And so we created a community dialogue. I heard from a really interesting guy from Kleiner Perkins, Venture Capital, who contacted me and said, hey, I hear you have this dilemma on how to deal with your organic waste. Well, we've looked at all the technologies. We've embraced something we call dry fermentation. We've got 12 plants up and operating in Germany. We've got 12 in the works. We'd love a demonstration project in North America. Palo Alto would be the perfect place to do it. We might even be able to help you finance it. I'd love to put you in touch with the guy who knows about the technology. So had a meeting. That was really exciting. We created a task force. They looked at all the different technologies. They recommended something along these lines. It's anaerobic digestion. And now we're looking at the possibility of converting all of our organic waste, so it's yard waste, it's food scraps, and sewage sludge from the water treatment plant into biogas, which is a renewable energy. And there'd be enough to power 1,900 vehicles or 1,400 homes. So this is renewable energy we'd be producing in Palo Alto for use in Palo Alto. Plus we'd be able to retire the incinerators there. Right now we burn our sewage sludge, uses a lot of energy, creates a lot of greenhouse gases, and the end product is an ash that is hazardous because the copper content is too high. So we'd save about $800,000 a year just on not incinerating things. Plus we'd be generating all this revenue from renewable energy. So it's the environmental initiatives that I'm proudest of, but we really accomplished a lot this year. It's an incredible city council. We've got great staff. People in the community hear about the little glitches, the road bumps. We have 3 newspapers in town, and they're all competing for readers. So sometimes the sensational stories.
We'll talk about that. But are there some new programs that the city has also started in some of these green rebate programs or whatnot to help us move further along that road?
Right. Well, one of the things that holds people back from investing in some of the technologies is the upfront costs. And we're trying to address that. So we have a new program that will provide interest-free loans for small businesses to help them become more energy efficient. And they pay back that loan on their monthly utility bill. And after 5 or 6 years, it's all paid off. And then every month, they're saving considerable energy and money. So it's great for the economy as well. And we're looking into a program called California First, where residents they would borrow money to do photovoltaics or solar water heating, and they would pay it back on a lien on their property. So if they sell their home, then the new buyer inherits all the equipment and the debt, which is paid monthly, but you're saving about as much money as you're paying. So it's a great way to move us forward. And again, Palo Alto is one of the leaders there.
So in a year of economic stress all over this country, all over the world really, Palo Alto still, you're looking at a year that was filled with some really exciting movement and new things. But let's talk about some of the difficulties that were posed for the council. You know, because you had to start talking about budget cuts, for example. So what was the hard parts of, well, it's all hard, but what are the memorable, painful cuts that had to happen this year?
Well, we had a $10 million deficit, and it's a structural deficit. It's not in 1 year it'll go away. So we really had to come up with a plan over the coming years to address that. And the plan was to meet it through three sources. One was reducing costs of programs and services. One was reducing costs to employees. And then the third was the business license tax. And unfortunately, the business license tax failed, which is going to make the next few years very, very challenging for the City Council. And we're going to see cuts in programs. I mean, some that we're looking at is our emergency preparedness program. We're also looking at safety programs related to the schools. These are things that people are going to really feel. And people will come to the City Council meeting and they'll say, you can't cut this program, it's vital to Palo Alto, but we're looking at a deficit, you know, that we have to meet. And it's going to be very, very challenging. I'm not going to miss that part of serving on the City Council. We had very tough labor negotiations with SEIU, which is our largest labor union. These are people who have worked hard for the city for many years. We have great employees. No one wants to cut benefits. We didn't give them raises this year. We simply couldn't. And we are now asking them to pay more into medical expenses and pension plans. So
and that's a done deal. That contract was signed for the next term?
It's a one-year deal, but actually it's coming up for renewal very soon. So just it took us 5 months to reach that deal. And they would say it wasn't really a deal, that it was something imposed on them. It wasn't based on everyone agreeing times are tough and we just can't continue to pay the types of pensions that we were in the past. We have police and fire coming up this year. And police were good this year. They agreed not to take raises, which they contractually were allowed to have. Fire, a little bit more challenging. But so those are all coming up this year. And then we also got our management team that we're going to have to negotiate with.
And they're talking about becoming a unionized
It's
team,
a possibility. Right? It's a possibility.
Uh-huh.
So fortunately this year we avoided any strikes. There was a one-day strike that didn't have too big of an impact on the city. But if you're looking at, you know, a week, 2 weeks, and people aren't having their garbage picked up or getting their electricity fixed if it's down, then you have real problems. And morale is so important. I mean, these people are part of our community, and we want them to be happy and feel like it's a great place to work.
But what about the morale? Do you notice anything as a council person when you walk through the City Hall doors now? Has the vibe changed at all?
Well, you know, I've had a lot of meetings with some of the leaders of the labor unions, and, you know, obviously they were hoping for a better outcome for them. I think they were disappointed, but I think they're realizing that times have changed, and the old way of doing business just isn't working right now. We have tremendous problems with health care on the national level. That's why there's this big national debate about where we go. Some of the ideas could really benefit Palo Alto and other jurisdictions, but I think we're going to see a lot of our neighboring communities facing similar challenges, and the future is uncertain at this point, and we have to be adaptable, and that's very hard for some people. So
looking at some of the more difficult votes where things went down to a 5-4 decision, what are a couple of those that you remember over the past year or so?
Well, we had a lot of unanimous votes, and the ones that are more challenging are 4-5. I would say development issues are the most contentious in the community. There are a lot of people who don't want Palo Alto to change, feel there are already too many people here, that that has an impact on our schools, on our parks and services. And there are others who feel that we have an obligation to house more of our workforce. We have more than 2.5 employees for every one employable person who lives in Palo Alto. So a lot of people are commuting in from Mountain View, East Palo Alto, San Jose, as far away as Los Baños and Tracy. And that has impacts on traffic congestion, on air quality, on climate change. Plus, we're asking neighboring communities to pick up a burden that we are creating through all of the jobs here. And we love the jobs because a lot of them bring in revenue for the city, which is why we have great programs and services. But we see housing as more of a burden. So why not push that off on neighboring communities? And personally, I don't feel that's really fair. I feel like we either need to decrease the amount of jobs we have, which would be very controversial, or increase the amount of housing. And we really need to do it in a smart way. We need to put people in near public transportation. We need mixed use with retail on the ground floor and housing above. Have a little bit more compact development in some areas of Palo Alto, like around the train station. So issues like MLK Plaza was a 5-4 vote. A lot of people.
Way?
It voted to move forward, so 39
With
housing units. But what we got out of that was a guaranteed grocery store. That was a community benefit. If we didn't allow the project as it was proposed, we wouldn't have a grocery store there. The same issue came up with the block that JJ&F is on, that a developer, they're going to be able to make a lot more profit renting to offices, to other retailers. Basically, the profit margin on grocery stores is just so slim that you have to subsidize it to keep it. But the benefit is you have a neighborhood grocery store that people could walk to, ride their bicycles to, that people have loved and appreciated for decades.
Absolutely.
And
I was a College Terrace resident and shopped there a lot,
So part of the trade-off is if we really want to keep this here, we might have to allow higher density on the rest of the property. And so that was a controversial issue that it was a split vote, probably not 5-4. And then I'd say the other one was the composting, because in order to keep composting in Palo Alto, we might have to undedicate 6 or 7 acres of old landfill, which is going to become parkland. Well, some people say that area is already heavily impacted. It's a dump. There's no wildlife value there. But others say, well, we have dedicated as parkland, and it should stay that way. So that was a 5-4 vote to even just take the next step to move forward on a solution.
The next step is just to study it further,
or? We're doing some further studies at this point, but the council is on record saying that we support anaerobic digestion. And the question is—
in town?
Well, I think some people interpret it as in town, and some people interpret it as somewhere in the region. So that issue is going to come up again. But I think once we see the financials, there will be a lot of incentive to keep it here, because it's great for our climate protection plan, it's great for zero waste, and I think it could be a real boon for the economy.
It's interesting. It's kind of a sign of the times, I guess, that, you have everybody considers themselves environmentalists, but you have the people that want the park, not to be impacted by a composting facility, and so they're environmentalists. And then you have the folks that see the benefits of this composting and doing it at home and all the benefits to the environment that way. And so, and even with the split on housing, I'm sure the people that oppose the housing still are able to say, I'm green, I'm an environmentalist somehow, even though there's this greater army of commuters are creating the pollution.
Well, I think one argument that could be made is if we just keep building more housing, more and more people will come. And overpopulation is driving so many environmental issues and community issues. When you think of carrying capacity, how many people can Palo Alto handle in a sustainable way? How many people can California handle? Right now, the population of California is 38 million. It's projected to increase to 60 million by 2050. At the same time, climate change is going to affect the Sierra snowpack. It'll probably decline by 12 to 50%. So there'll be less available water. Bay level rise will have impact communities along the bay. Huge challenges ahead, and my personal feeling is we have to address population growth. Now, is it by closing the border of Palo Alto and forcing those people to live in the Central Valley and commute in? Obviously, that's not sustainable. So what we need to do is we need to do smart growth, plus we need statewide and national and even global policies to rein in the number of births. Where the Earth, we probably need, I think it's 5 or 6 Earths to have enough resources for everyone to live at our standard of living. So obviously, that's not sustainable.
Well, and the more jobs you put into the community, the more people that are coming into the community. So you're, unless you kind of cut your own stream of revenue by stopping all those jobs, it's hard to then say, well, we'll take the jobs but not the housing, as you had said before. So it's full of, it's a maze of different feelings, and people bump up against,
right.
I'm green here, but I'm not very green there.
Right. Well, it's all about, we have a society built on growth. If we're not growing, then we're falling behind. And I think we need to relook at our value system. We need to reinvent the American dream. We need to focus more on community, on family, on having time, on doing the things that we wish we had more time to do. One nice story is we approved an affordable housing, a very affordable housing project on Alma, where Ole's Car Shop is. So it's 50 units. The neighbors at 800 High Street, which was a controversial project that went to referendum, and there was a citywide vote on that, which allowed it to move forward. Some of the people living there had real concerns about traffic, about parking, and they opposed the project. But once it was approved, said, we'd really like a chance to meet with the proponents and suggest some ideas. So we convened a small meeting, and we had a very, very productive conversation. And they said, you know what? We want these new neighbors to be part of our community. We want to welcome them. We want them to live comfortably, and we think some changes in the way that the parking structure is operated, in bicycle parking, other things could make a big difference for them and for us. And those ideas were appreciated by the proponents and staff, and it looks like we're all going to work together to make it an even better project. So that was the best of Palo Alto. There was a disagreement, a decision was made, and everyone agreed, let's work together to move forward.
That's a good story, and I wonder if you look at all the neighborhoods where there are apartments on the edges, or even in my neighborhood, a mobile home park, and do you as a mayor or council person hear complaints once everybody's living in the same neighborhood, or does it basically kind of disappear and all those things you worried about are not that important?
Well, I think a lot of it is fear that there's change coming, it's more people, it's higher density. Sometimes there are amenities that come with higher density. You have enough people to support a small grocery store that everyone benefits, things like that. But I think there are some legitimate concerns that do stay. For example, a lot of people were sad to see Ricky's Hyatt get converted to housing. And there are a lot of reasons for that. The developer wasn't listening to the community, wasn't cooperating. The community was being very strong in its position. But now we have housing there, and we have narrow streets. A lot of the people use their garages there for storing stuff, so they have to park in the street, so there's not a lot of parking. And then over on Wilkie Way, one street over, they're seeing more spillover parking. And they're disappointed in that, and they're very cautious about any development in that area, that they're going to get more parking on their street, and that's legitimate. Bob Moss, one of our residents who's very involved in local politics, he collected signatures for an initiative to require streets to be wide enough that people could park on them. And the council, rather than putting it to a vote of the people, we adopted that. So that's addressing the parking issue, but part of smart growth is having smaller streets so you can have more greenscape and you can encourage more safe bicycling and things. So there are trade-offs, and we have habits and we have a lifestyle that's based on the old way, a little bit more of the sprawl mentality. And it's going to take a lot to shift people to a little bit more urban living. I mean, people live in Palo Alto because they don't want to live in San Francisco. They don't want to live in the Central Valley. But times are changing.
So I know how much pride you have in how forward-thinking Palo Alto has been when it comes to energy, renewable energies, and as part of our utilities options, and the plastic bag ban, and a number of ways that we help people move forward into energy conservation. On the other side of the coin, where is Palo Alto lagging behind? What would you like to see if it was a comprehensively green community or progressive?
Well, I think transportation has been a tough one for us. We have the Caltrain corridor, which is good at getting people up and down the peninsula, but is not connected to the East Bay, where a lot of the workforce lives. We have a program with the Palo Alto shuttle to get people around town. That's been very successful. Unfortunately, that's one of the programs that might get cut next year if we just don't have the funding for it. Stanford, right next door, they have a fantastic transportation demand management program where they pay employees not to drive. They make it as easy as possible for them to bike to work. They have the Marguerite Shuttle, which is free. But now they're looking at one of the biggest development projects our community has ever seen, and that's the expansion of the Stanford Hospital and Lucile Packard Children's Hospital. And the plan is to add another 1.3 million square feet. So the shopping center is 1.4 million square feet. So essentially, you're taking something the equivalent of the Stanford Shopping Center and putting it with the existing hospitals there. And it's going to create about 2,300 jobs. There's going to be a need for housing in the community. Otherwise, people are going to have to commute in. So the challenge is, how do we work with Stanford to make this project fit into the community as seamlessly as possible? And they have some ideas for suggestions. They've got a proven track record with the Marguerite Shuttle and other things. But this is a very big project, and it's going to be a huge challenge.
So you brought up one of the other big events for the council, the Stanford expansion, and is that another likely 5-4 kind of heavily fought out and argued dilemma in front of the next council?
Well, it won't be a 5-4 vote because at least one council member will have to recuse himself. Larry Klein's wife works at Stanford, so he can't vote on those. So worst case scenario is you have a 4-4 vote, and then we all ask, well, where do we go from here? But I think that there's going to be a lot of negotiations, a lot of compromise, and I couldn't predict how it's going to turn out. I would hope that we come up with a project that's a real model for moving forward. And Stanford feels they're having their needs met, and the communities, not just Palo Alto, but all the communities in the surrounding area, feel protected from possible impacts of traffic and housing, et cetera. So that's going to be an interesting one. I think that Stanford is happy to see some of the council members who have been more outspoken leaving the council now, and we have 4 new council members. 2 of them have planning backgrounds, so they'll have a lot to bring. But it's going to be a different council, and we'll see how it all plays out.
So, and another big issue that came up in your year as mayor was the search for a new police chief. Even though the police chief works for the city manager, gets hired by the city manager, how did that impact the council in that process?
Well, you know, the council, we were involved in, paying close attention to the search that the city manager took on. We approved the position once it was recommended, but it really was, there are 4 employees that we hire directly. The city manager, and we hired a great new one, Jim Keene, last year. City auditor, we hired a great new one last year, Linda Burchard. And then we have our city clerk, Donna Greider, and the city attorney, Gary Baum. And so those are the council appointed officers. We interview, we hire them. The rest of the staff is hired mainly by those department heads and the city manager. And the tough issue for the city manager was that there are a lot of people in the community who have been concerned about issues of police violence in the past, of racial profiling. In fact, our previous police chief made some unfortunate comments that sounded like racial profiling. I personally don't think she's a racist person, but it didn't sound good, and there was a real uproar in the community. And people really pay attention in Palo Alto, which is great, but it also makes things a little bit more challenging. So the city manager, it was very important to do a thorough search. We did a national search. We probably had 40 people apply. He narrowed it down to 3 finalists. He involved people in the community in the interviews of those people, and it was decided that Dennis Burns, who was the assistant chief under Lynn Johnson, would be selected. I personally think that was a great choice. He's someone who really knows the community. I've seen him work with the police department, with everyone else there. He's highly respected. He's got a great sense of humor, but also really wants things to get done professionally, and a very approachable person. For me, you know, having grown up in Palo Alto, having worked on a lot of programs and projects in Palo Alto, I know a lot of people, and I hear from them, and I hear little stories that help me make decisions. And one friend said, you know, how do you feel about the selection of Chief Burns? And I said, I think it was a pretty good choice. And he said, I think it was the best choice because I've been working with him on some community forums, and he's always the first person to show up. He sets up the chairs. He participates in the discussions. He's very, very present. He's always the last one to leave. And I've just been so impressed working with him. So, you know, he inherited a tough position. He knew what he was getting into and still wanted to do it. And I think he'll do a great job. And we have a lot of work to do to, you know, mend fences with some of the neighboring communities like East Palo Alto that is predominantly non-white. And some of those folks have had trouble when they come into Palo Alto feeling they get pulled over without reason, and we need to improve that situation.
I know you were at the rally around those issues that was started with a march from East Palo Alto. And so do you feel that the council in general wants to give a message to the police chief and the force that that's a real area of concern?
Definitely that and other issues with the whole children's theater investigation. There were some council members who were very outspoken. They felt the investigation was flawed. We gave a number of apologies to the people who were involved with that. And you know, that was a problem we can't afford to repeat. And I think under Dennis Burns, we'll do much better. You know, one thing I'm really proud of is that shortly after Coretta Scott King passed away, Lodoris Cordell and I, we initiated a process of renaming the plaza in front of City Hall King Plaza after Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. And it was a little bit controversial. Some people felt like, well, you know, there are a lot of great local figures we should name the plaza after. That's a good point. A lot of other communities have things named after, especially Martin Luther King. Is this really a local issue? But we had great discussions about it, and we felt that King Plaza, which is what it's now called, being a free speech zone where people gather for various rallies and events would be very appropriate. And the council did vote to change the name, and we've been having celebrations there every Martin Luther King Day. And it's wonderful. We fill the council chambers. It's standing room only, and it shows all of the wonderful diversity of Palo Alto. A lot of people from the outside see it as a very white community, and it is predominantly white, but it's 20% Asian American, probably 2 or 3% African American, a small percent Latino, but people come out for these events and really feel empowered. And even some of the non-believers about naming the plaza, after coming to this first event, realized that this is something that meant a lot to the community, and especially some people in the community we don't hear from as often. And that was something I was really proud of on my
As a mayor, and actually throughout your whole term, if you were going to get things done, you had to you had to build your at least 4 other people to get the votes in your direction. What made you effective that way?
Well, it's interesting because I came from an advocacy background, and some people see advocacy as controversial, as aggressive, as not playing ball with others. But you know, my personality is I like to get along with people. Life is easier that way. I would hope that through discussion and really coming to the truth on issues that we could reach agreement. And you know, the tough issues are where you feel a little bit pro an issue and a little bit anti an issue, and it's really hard to make a vote on that. And you have to listen and pay attention and really look deep, and you fall on one side of the fence or the other. But shortly after I got elected, I went to a conference for newly electeds down in Los Angeles. And the 2 pieces of advice I took away with me that I always remember. One was that when you're running for office, you talk about the best possible thing. But when you're elected, you focus on the best thing possible, realizing there's some compromise. There's so much you can do. You know, push for it, but don't vote no just because something isn't perfect. And then the second piece of advice was to be nice to everybody, because it pleases your friends and it confuses your enemies. And why not? I mean, you can say the same things, but in a courteous, polite way, and people will really listen. instead of becoming entrenched and resistant. And you can make a lot more progress that way. And I think we have a fantastic city council, very bright people, very committed to Palo Alto, agree on most things, but not all things. And when we disagree, we have a full conversation, we eventually vote, and then we move on. And
is that dependent a lot on the mayor at the time, or what makes it cordial when in the past we've had councils that didn't like each other very much?
Well, I wish I could take credit, but I think the credit really goes to my colleagues. Just very pleasant people who are committed to dialogue and making the best vote possible. The mayor helps set the agendas, chairs the meetings. I think it's very important for the mayor to make sure everyone is heard. You have this balance of moving the agenda forward, because we don't like it when we have to stay there till 1 in the morning. But at the same time, everyone up there was elected and has a right to represent their constituents and the city. So, we have really good discussions. Sometimes it might take longer than we would prefer, but ultimately we do make a vote and we move on. I think some of the past city councils have taken smaller steps. They might vote to study something a little bit further, whereas this council, we know we have such a packed agenda every week that we need to keep moving forward. And even if something isn't perfect, we try to do our best.
So how do you, can you remember a disappointing vote that went the other way from you, and how you talked yourself out of not stewing and scowling when the next time you passed the 5 guys, or the 5 of them that voted the other way?
Well, there's not any vote that really stands out as, I had trouble going to sleep that night because I was so angry. But there was one very interesting one, and 2 colleagues and I, we proposed forming an environmental commission, and on the side to hire a sustainability coordinator who would help oversee that and all the sustainability programs in the city. And we came up for discussion. I felt like our colleagues had some good arguments against it, that, well, it might take more resources from the city, that we already have a utilities advisory commission that could be focusing more on energy-related issues, and we're now moving in that direction. We have a planning and transportation commission that can focus on a lot of land use issues. Sure, there's some issues that fall through the cracks, but maybe the Community Environmental Action Partnership, which is made up of residents and business owners, maybe they could fill some of that. So they felt like we didn't really need an environmental commission, but they agreed to hire a sustainability coordinator, which really surprised me, because it seemed to me that was a bigger step for us as a city. Since then, we've hired a wonderful coordinator. She's working with all the different departments. We are not only furthering our environmental agenda much faster, but we're looking for all sorts of ways to cut costs, because efficiency is good for the environment and it's good for the economy. And especially if we weigh in all of the hidden costs of what we do. And perhaps something that I'm most proud of, but was a little bit more theoretical than, well, we have a certain program because of it, is a couple weeks ago, a few of us, we introduced a resolution acknowledging the concept of externality costs, that there are hidden costs. And we really focused on fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas, that there are all sorts of health costs that we as a society pay, but the person burning the gasoline isn't paying up front. Climate change is going to cost Palo Alto in California billions of dollars, and it's an unfunded liability. We don't know where that money is going to come from. So we supported the idea of true cost pricing, that when we can, to incorporate some of those hidden costs into the price structure, so it might affect behavior a little bit. If you're paying what it really costs for gasoline, you might be more likely to carpool or ride the train or ride a bicycle. And if you do choose to drive, that money is going into abating the problem, mitigating the problem.
So what was the thing that happened that you're proud of?
We passed a resolution, and it began a community dialogue that I hope will continue on. But it's interesting, the following week, from one of our staff members, the idea of extended producer responsibility came up, that we should send a letter to the state encouraging that the packaging materials and materials themselves whoever produces them should have some responsibility to take care of the end product rather than just, it gets dumped in some landfill at the cost of the community. And the memo referred to externality costs. So what I'm hoping is in the discussion on these issues, we'll think about, okay, what's the environmental benefit of things? What's the cost to the city? And what's the true cost? Because a lot of times there are long-term savings that make it much more worthwhile. I mean, if we were looking out 50 years, we would behave so much more differently than we do right now. And
well, I have to look out just 2 minutes because we're almost at the end of our hour, and I just want to thank you. I want to ask you what's next. You're leaving the council. Where are you going?
Well, my wife and I were fortunate enough to buy a house in Palo Alto, so we're not going anywhere. I have a 6-month-old son, Aiden, who's a real sweetheart. I'm looking forward to spending more time with him. My day job is working with the Tuolumne River Trust, and we're working to protect the river where Palo Alto and 2.5 million other Bay Area residents get their water. That's where the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir is on the Tuolumne in Yosemite National Park. And I'm going to stay involved in a lot of the local issues. Now I'll get to pick and choose. Rather than being aware of everything that's going on and how it all ties together, I can really focus in on the things that mean a lot to me.
Peter, I'd like to ask you about how the public and you interacted. In particular, I'm thinking about the perception that a lot of us have that we elect somebody who's taken strong stands in the past on environment, in your case, and we think, well, great, now Peter's in office, he's going to make everything better and for the things I care about. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some faulty logic there, and I wanted you to talk about what it's like when people have those expectations.
Well, a vote can pass on a 5-4 vote, and if you win the vote, and that could be a very positive thing, but you don't really have a mandate, and a lot of people aren't really bought in. So I think it's really important for all the colleagues to see that the community really cares about something. I mean, that's how we make progress. We had a very environmental city council before I joined, and I think my election, people saw that there's probably going to be a stronger focus on environmental issues, and that kind of empowered me to move forward. But it's key that people weigh in with emails to the council, with letters, and showing up to show that this is something we really care about, because that empowers us to move forward. I think that was always my concern, that people would feel like, oh, there are good people on the council to get taken care of. I'll spend tonight with my family. Very important. We need to spend time with our families, but we also need to stay really engaged in our community. And I guess sometimes I was a little disappointed when I would feel like I'd stick my neck out a little bit to create a community dialogue around an issue, and hoping that I'd see some letters to the editor that would continue this discussion going on. But unfortunately, you're more likely to hear from people when they're disappointed about something than when they're pleased. When something goes well, people kind of take it for granted, or they think, oh, next time I see him or her, I'll thank him. But it's really important, and that's something that I always try to do when I'm lobbying an elected official, is when they do the right thing to thank them. And if you can do it publicly, then it empowers them. They're more likely to do it next time. But if they get beaten up, you might not get their vote next time around.
How influential is it to be a squeaky wheel and to show up at council when you are upset and all that? Does that swing a lot of votes?
I think if you have a proven track record of delivering votes, like if you're influential in election, if your endorsement can sway people, and so if you're a leader, if elected officials think that you represent a real constituency, then it makes a difference. I mean, we get some people who come to a lot of city council meetings and they're very upset, and often rightfully so, but it's not as constructive as if they're doing more behind the scenes, trying to come up with some compromises or moving forward, if they're engaging more people from the community, maybe they're even doing some kind of initiative in the community to change things. So a lot of times you have to prove that it's worthwhile to listen to you, that you represent a lot of people in the community.
What about when people are upset with what the council decided or what you voted on as an individual council member, and it gets pretty personal. And I'm bringing that up because over the years I've talked to other council members in forums like this, and what has been said was that they were surprised. It's like they didn't realize how personal it can get when they're just doing it, you know, as it's not like anybody's getting rich who's on the council from that work. And the level of anger that can be directed, I imagine as mayor it might be even magnified. What was your experience with that?
Well, I did lose one friend in the course of the 4 years, and it was over a development issue, and those are very controversial. People get very passionate. This was an issue, it was a development project near the California Avenue train station, and the developer was asking for higher density to allow ground floor retail and then 2 stories of apartments. And apartments are more affordable than condos. They bring in a lot of the workforce that Palo Alto depends on. My feeling was that Association of Bay Area Governments is putting a lot of pressure on Palo Alto and other communities to build more housing. And they're asking us to build, you know, thousands of units in the next few years. Obviously, we have limited space, and we need to be very strategic about what we do. This particular location, there were no immediate neighbors. It was near the Caltrain tracks. It was close to California Avenue, so people could walk there. It was close to the train station. And I felt, well, if we're going to need to build housing, this is the right site to do it. And there are some people very disappointed, and I think their feeling was that we have too much housing in Palo Alto. And my feeling was, well, where else should we put this housing? I mean, we're going to have to build it eventually. It's not in your neighborhood. Here's a place where it shouldn't be very controversial. People who get so passionate that they're willing to give up a friendship on it, that's their choice. For me, probably a better friend not to have. There are a lot of other people out there who are more reasonable and are going to respect the fact that we have challenging decisions. And sometimes it's a decision where, you know, I'm right on the fence and I'm trying to listen to all the arguments. Don't come in with an agenda on this particular issue. But I have to be fair to everyone, whether it's the developer or the neighbors. Got to take into consider economic issues as well as issues of community and environment. And it's not easy.
Well, I imagine if it's a friend that gets that upset, that really hits hard. But how do you deal with the people that barely know you that are calling you names? And how does that work for you? Did you develop a thicker skin when you were on council?
Well, you know, I come from an advocacy background, so we're used to controversy. We're used to be called different things. I think it was great training for being on the city council. I avoid town hall forum, which is the online forum where it's anonymous, so people don't have to stand up for what they say. And most of it's very negative. It doesn't matter what the issue is, but it's people who are complaining, who are flaming other people, tearing them down. Some people, the way that they feel better about themselves is trying to bring other people down, rather than let's all rise together as a community. So I just don't read those, because if someone's not willing to attach their name to it or speak to me in person, then it's someone who I don't really respect. There are some of the consummate complainers. There are people who do attach their name, and they write lots of emails and letters to the editor, and there's a handful of them, and I'd love to see them do something constructive. They are very good at picking out the problems. To me, that's easy. I mean, if your job is to find problems in the world, you could be very, very successful at that. The challenge is, how do we not just identify the problem, but move beyond them and make a change? And we've got, you know, commissions people can get involved with the city. Anyone can run for city council, assuming they're a citizen and they live in Palo Alto. There are a lot of nonprofits that are doing incredible work. There are great ways to be constructive. And those are the people who I really admire. So if someone comes to me lobbying, and it's someone who I see really has a track record in the community, isn't just a naysayer, but really cares about making it a better community, that influences me a lot.
Speaking of influence, do you feel that when you leave the council and continue work as an environmentalist, that you're taking away some lessons from your years knowing how a council works now?
Yeah, I think it's going to be incredibly helpful to me. knowing how elected officials think, the compromises they have to make. People want to be liked and appreciated. They want to do the right thing. They want to be heroes on issues. And in the community, there are a lot of ways we could help elected officials do the right thing and look good and maybe get reelected if that's what their goal is, or go on to higher office. It's different. On the outside, you're very passionate about a few issues, and that's all that really matters to you. As an elected, you're looking at everything, and how does it all fit together? And how can I make decisions that are good for the most people in the community? It might not please everybody, and trying to please everyone can slow down the process so that nothing happens.
But are you giving a tip to would-be influencers, would-be lobbyists to approach a council member with the sense that they're trying to balance a lot of interests, to come with a constituency, like you said before, or representing one, or are those your takeaways?
Yeah, and I think if someone comes to me and says, look, there are some problems with this the way it's framed right now, but with a few tweaks, the project can go through, or the program can be implemented without the negatives. And that's one thing I'm really proud of our city council for, is that we'll have discussions and someone might say, well, I really want to vote for this, but there's a few pieces of it that I can't approve. And we'll have a discussion and we'll tweak it a little bit. And then I, who is going to vote for it anyway, feel much more comfortable voting for it. Because the closer something is to perfect, the better we are. The less criticism, the more effective it's going to be. And so as an advocate on the outside, if you can come with information to help people become experts, if you can come with ideas for moving things forward, if you can make an elected official look good and get lots of appreciation from the community, you're much more likely to be successful.
Speaking of looking good or looking bad, how would you characterize the press coverage of what the council does week in, week out in Palo Alto?
Well, on a whole, I'd say it's pretty good. When you're on the inside reading reports, hearing the discussion and voting, you find all the little flaws. There's a lot of mistakes. I mean, any newspaper, at least one article will have some mistakes in it. In Palo Alto, we have 3 newspapers. They're all competing for readership. More people who read them, the more advertisements they can sell, the better off they are financially. So sometimes they tend to focus on the sensational. I would say, especially the Daily Post, I think that their niche is to really stir things up. And you wonder, do people, believe everything they're reading in this paper, or is it kind of a for fun thing? Does our community want to have things to get angry about? Whenever we do the surveys at the end of the year, we find that the community feels things are run really well in Palo Alto. They're very pleased with the services and the programs. We get some of the top ratings in the country, and we win awards. But a lot of times you hear from the people who are looking for something to complain about. But on a whole, I'd say the coverage is quite fair, and it keeps us honest. We know that everything is going to end up in print eventually. So
when you read something in print, and I'm including the Post, it mostly looks like what happened, but it may be selecting some of the things that or deselecting things that you wish they would have written about. Is that fair? Or?
Well, it depends. I mean, there's a lot of different things that could happen. It could be names wrong. It could
let's
be votes
go to
wrong.
the California tree fiasco, California Avenue tree thing. How'd you feel about the press coverage?
I thought the press coverage was pretty fair on that. Essentially what happened there is staff didn't follow procedure. It had been in the works for a number of years, but very few people knew about it. Some of the business owners on California Avenue knew about the master plan, but it caught a lot of us by surprise. It caught the city manager by surprise, it caught the city council by surprise, and the community was outraged. People were so upset. I mean, that was one of the issues we heard from more people about than almost any. And maybe the same thing could have happened with the right amount of outreach in the community, people knowing what to expect, and that, yes, these trees are going to get removed, but the idea is to put in better trees that are more suitable for California Avenue, and in 5 or 10 years it's going to be glorious. Here's the vision, and here's what the photos look like. But it caught everyone by surprise, and California Avenue looks very barren right now. Now the follow-up to that was that the city took it very seriously. I mean, we were embarrassed by what happened. We had a very thorough process of engaging the community on where do we go from here. And I think people are pleased.
But as far as the press coverage, I guess you're saying it reflected what really was out there in terms of outrage.
I think there was a right to be critical of the city on that issue. On some other issues, I feel like they're critical to stir things up.
And to sell the paper.
Right, and it's not
I'm
very...
going to have to move us through the end of the show, even though I'd like to hear more on this and other, some of your memorable experiences, ribbon cutting, but we're going to have to leave that because our hour is up. But I want to say that we as Palo Alto citizens, I think I'm speaking for many who enjoyed having you as our council representative and then as your year as mayor. So wishing you the best of luck and enjoyment of your son and your new house in Palo Alto. So from the Mid-Peninsula Community Media Center, wishing you goodbye.